one thing I never understood, how do they pick who to save? Because they saved Fannie Mae and Fannie Mac. Freddie Mae and Fannie Mac? Or is it the other way around?
They saved Fannie and Freddie.
Yeah. But they didn't save Lehman.
Yeah. And they saved Bear Stearns.
Yeah. How are those decisions
They didn't
made?
save Lehman on Monday.
Yeah.
And on Tuesday, they saved AIG.
How are those decisions made?
They flip a coin. No. It depends on the case and the circumstance. A lot of people will say Lehman was a huge, massive mistake, that had they not let Lehman Brothers failed, that the crisis really wouldn't have gotten that bad. That just, to me, is not true. Like, there was problems. And at that point, it wasn't just Lehman, it was all of them, like Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley. They all could have gotten down. But they realized they needed to send a message to the people at Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, all the investment bankers, that the government isn't always going to be a safety net for you.
Fair.
So because they had Bear Stearns in March, they didn't want to repeat that with Lehman, okay? AIG was a totally different subject, and I still have nightmares about AIG because we literally learned about all the counterparty risk of AIG once we knew they were about to fail. And we realized they held the insurance for all of the investment banks. And so my job was, I was actually on a whiteboard looking at all the different countries we were exposed to, the amount of notional derivatives that were out there, which, we now know and is visible, but we had money owed to like different foreign countries that I don't want to go into which, but it was obvious to me just looking at this that, Peter, if we didn't save AIG, there'd be missiles launched at the U.S. People would be really upset with us. So that's why then...
that's a bold statement.
Well, to the degree of the default of bonds from America or what would happen as a result, yes, it is a bold statement. But when you look at the consequence that would cause to another nation with our debt, the United States is founded with Alexander Hamilton saying the U.S. has to be good about its debt. So I think that's where I'm saying that. But needless to say, it was all around the world. It was definitely globally exposed. So ultimately, they came in and they said, we have to bail out AIG, which again, I say is on Tuesday, the day after they said, we don't do bailouts. We're not saving Lehman Brothers. In fact, George Bush was very upset because he had to speak at the National Economic Club. And in his speech, he was going to say, we don't do any more bailouts. But then he had to change it because AIG had just been bailed out.
And when this all happened, was there like a build-up of suspicion or rumors? Or did you just come into work one day and it was like a shit show?
So it was very quiet. But we did know about IndyMac Bank, which is why I'm excited to share with your listeners a little bit about what's, I think, a little bit underreported, but speaks a lot to people's lack of confidence in the banking system. But there was definitely this large bank, but at the time, the FDIC fund was very large. So we knew even if this bank failed, we'd be okay. But we started getting murmurs in of things like Washington Mutual, Wachovia. So it was all building up, but the crisis didn't really hit until July. And then it just felt like the walls were going to fall apart because things were getting so turned around, particularly with Lehman Brothers, like with breaking the buck on a US dollar. You just felt like it could just collapse the entire financial system. So it was scary.
Yes, very scary. Was there also like a weird excitement to working on it, knowing you're part of potentially the solution? And I don't mean that in a kind of like derogatory way about what actually happened, like it was terrible. But like you're central to part of this. You're coming into work as somebody to help try and fix this. Was there like an excitement to it? And also, were you like working all God's hours on this?
Yeah, I was working a ton of time on it, and the shift really was that it was interesting. I had experiences I never thought I would have with it, but I also realized that it called for regulators to have some curiosity and come up with some clever ways to figure things out. I was not that this is an excuse, but I was like a junior analyst. I was like the people that they would come to ask what the quotes were on the Bloomberg screen. So I kind of had the joy of analyzing it all, but not really having to make the hard, big decisions.
Are you the dude in margin call?
Yeah, basically.
Yeah.
It's like, Scrubs. I was like the guy who was like, they come over, what's the TED spread? Well, it's inverted, and never saw that happen. And but yes, there was definitely an excitement. When I left after a year. And I was actually looking at maybe getting a couple of other jobs before I left the FDIC. I was telling people about it, and they said, boy, you've had 20 years of experience in that 8 months of things like people would love to just have been part of one of those projects. So yeah, and it was totally uncharted territory.
Yeah, and you know what? I see the kind of similarities between what's happening in like these crypto markets, where essentially over leverage, people lending money to each other, everybody kind of like interlinked, and you get the first one, the second one, then boom, everything collapsed. Like in pretty quick time. Was that? Do you see that as like, excuse the word crypto, but cryptos, because it did involve other cryptocurrencies? Was this like cryptos 2008?
It absolutely was. I mean, because the same things were being discussed that's being discussed now. The fight between, like Gemini and DCG. I mean, you had Morgan Stanley, Goldman Sachs. There was all interconnections. They all lent money to each other. The difference was that they were backed by the government. The government needed them as a utility to exist. In this case, the government's like, good luck, guys. Go figure it out amongst yourselves. And, maybe people think that's like the way the free market works. But I do really worry about that. My big thing is about there has to be consumer protection. I don't think for crypto there's been enough consumer protection. Like I was saying before, I worked for the Home Affordable Modification Program. So I believe everyone really deserves a fair shake. And what has me really upset right now is a lot of the things with Celsius, because with Mashinsky winning the right over the customer accounts.
Insane.
That's just not the way it's ever supposed to work.
Yeah.
Those people should be paid first, and that should be the priority.